Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 16 of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Today's guest is Olly Richards. Olly is an entrepreneur, publisher, and language specialist from the UK. He runs a website about language learning called iwillteachyoualanguage.com. It reaches millions of people annually. Olly has published over 20 books with language publisher Teach Yourself and dozens more with his own publishing house, Olly Richards Publishing. In addition to teaching languages, Olly enjoys mentoring other online business owners, running conferences, masterminds, and virtual summits under the Creator Smarts brand.
Hey everyone, buckle up for a new episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast, the one and only podcast made to help you launch your business or take your existing business to a level of success you could never have imagined. Whether you're a school owner, freelancer, publisher, or other entrepreneur, you're sure to pick up lots of actionable advice when you listen to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Remember to visit eflmagazine.com for great articles and features. Without further ado, here's your host, the founder of EFL Magazine, Philip Pound.
Welcome back, everybody. It's my great pleasure to introduce Olly Richards to you today. And good afternoon where you are. Is it, I presume, Olly, where are you at the moment?
It's actually morning. It's half past 10 in the morning. I've got beautiful morning sun shining across the Devon Hilllands here in the southwest of England. And so probably quite different to to where you are with the Tokyo Tower in the background. But good to talk to you.
Yeah, great to catch up. We've been kind of going back and forth over the past few months, and just to say, I don't actually live near Tokyo Tower. It's all kind of fake news. This backdrop you might see for those people who it's a podcast, so we're not putting it on video. But yeah, I have a background of Tokyo Tower. So, what took you to Devon? Are you from Devon originally?
No, not at all. I've been in London. I mean, I've been all around the world in the last 20 years or so, but in London recently. And I think like a lot of people, lockdown has helped to put things into perspective a little bit because it's been quite brutal over here. I think you guys in Japan have got off quite lightly comparatively. And it just kind of made me reassess. And I realized I wanted more space and some more greenery. And because I work from home, one of the things that I put a premium on was just have a big office space. And, I've got a garage here that I want to turn into a gym and, garden where I can just walk around in. And so, yeah, it was your kind of classic midlife relocation to the countryside, I think.
Midlife, you don't look that old to me.
No, I'm going to be 40 this year, believe it or not.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. But I feel 21, so there you go.
Yeah, same here, so 46 this year. So in the same category. So Devon, beautiful part of the world. One of the sunnier places in England.
Yeah, certainly during the times when it's not raining. Well,
today, it's the sun is streaming in through the window. You think it's like, oh, wow, it's always like that. But
yeah, no, not
unfortunately not. So great. So just a little bit about Olly. Can you tell me a little bit about your company URL? And
Sure. Yeah. So I run a business called iwillteachyoualanguage.com. Although depending on when people are listening to this, it could well be storylearning.com because we're actually in the middle of a change. And that kind of gives you a hint at what we do. So I teach languages through story, and that involves online courses, a very large range of published books, which are available in fine bookstores everywhere, even in Japan, I've seen them in Tokyo. Yeah, although usually in the foreign dictionary section, which is kind of weird. But yeah, so books of short stories, books of things like that. And yeah, everything we do is based on teaching languages through stories in different ways.
Okay. And just to go back, just looking at your bio, I was looking at Amazon and you sent me a little bit through. So it all started when you were 19. Before that, you you said you didn't have a talent for languages or weren't too bothered about learning them. So what was the moment that kind of took you to learning languages?
Very much. So I grew up in the countryside in the UK, typical monolingual life, didn't know what a foreign language was. But I moved to London when I was university age, and after my first year there, I actually took a job in a cafe, and I was working with people from all over the world, Italy, France, Sweden. And this kind of opened my eyes to the fact that there's a big wide world out there of people, of places and people and cultures that are quite different from English culture. And I found it very appealing. And I didn't like the fact that everyone else had to learn English to speak with me, and often spoke each other's languages as well. So I thought, hey, you know what? I could learn their languages. Why don't I try that? And so that kind of piqued the interest. And then around the same time, my girlfriend of 2 years decided to walk out on me. And that kind of sent me into a bit of a tailspin, which culminated in me buying a one-way ticket on the Eurostar to go and live in Paris for 6 months, where I learned French. And that was the beginning, because I was fairly successful at learning French, and that gave me the confidence then to go on and learn other languages, which is kind of what started my language learning journey. And I've learned over 10 languages now, to varying degrees. And so I've kind of been very fortunate to live a life that's full of language and travel. And but it all started back there in those dark days of pain and breakup in London.
Wow, there's an origin story for you. It's a bit like Sliding Doors or some movie like that. But, they it happens. So yeah, you decided there wasn't much to live for in London, and you said, okay, I want to try something new. Go to Paris. You were 19 at the time.
Yeah, pretty young.
Yeah,
I mean, 19 is the kind of age where you can get away with just disappearing. Because you have no commitments really. And it just so happened that I'd taken a year off university, which was a kind of crazy decision really. It was actually for other reasons, but it just gave me the flexibility to say, sod this, I'm going somewhere else. And so I did.
And so how was your level of French before you left?
Oh, I mean, effectively zero. I'd done a little bit at school, but you know what school French is like. And so I couldn't do much when I arrived. So I was, starting from scratch.
Mm. And you bought a one-way ticket?
I did. I bought a one-way ticket. I had a contact there, someone I could stay with, who I kind of bunked with for a few weeks. And then I moved into a youth hostel, and I was sort of stuck in the middle of the Quartier Latin in Paris. And in a youth hostel, just got a job one day. The owner of the youth hostel that I was staying at said, "Hey, are you staying?" And I was like, "Yeah. Do you want to work in another youth hostel?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And so I found myself actually working a regular job, working night shifts in a youth hostel in Paris, which was really, I wouldn't do it again, but it was a good experience.
How much French did you need for that? I mean, English would have been a big.
Yeah, it was one of those interesting things where the job, the actual ins and outs of the job, I could get by in English because a lot of the people traveling there were international, so they spoke English. But the guy who hired me said, do you speak French? And I said yes, because I knew I wouldn't get the job otherwise. And then I had a lot of French things happening. So French people would walk in off the street, French people would call, my boss would speak French, and so but it was just like, that kind of attitude when you're 19 and you just don't care. You just find a way somehow to do it. And so I just had this real kind of, just strong-headed approach to thinking, okay, I'm going to learn this. I'm just going to do it. And so it kind of I just threw myself right in at the deep end, which is an interesting strategy. But I think because of my commitment and dedication to learning it, it worked out in the end.
And when you said you went straight in, you just started practicing straight away.
Yeah, I mean, I bought textbooks. I sat and studied in my free time, tried to memorize words. Listening to things I found on the street. I mean, I had no concept of a method at that point. It was just, learn. And so I, doing the exercises in grammar books, and I made little flashcards to try and remember my verbs. So it was a fairly inept method, but I always like to say that the method is less important than your attitude. And because the method, you can figure it out as you go along, which is exactly what I did. But it was the attitude that gave me the kind of wherewithal to actually take on that challenge.
Okay. And what is that attitude? How would you describe it?
It's this: I'm going to learn this at all costs if it kills me. That's it, basically.
Where did that come from? Was that your upbringing, or was it just the situation that you were in, or was it?
I don't know.
No way back. Or...
I actually tend to approach most things in life like this. If I decide to get fit, or if I decide to start a business, or I decide to go and teach English in Japan, or move to Brazil, it's all things that I've done. I tend to be quite absolutist about things, and I think I've always had this can-do attitude, and I don't know where it comes from really. But I've always been aware that I've had it, and I haven't been scared to take risks in the kind of personal sense. And I think I've always kind of leaned into that aspect of my personality, and it's been good for me, I think.
So when you say can-do attitude, do attitude, you just do it basically. There's no.
I just do it, and I figure out how to do it along the way. And this is most relevant to business as well, because there's no right way to do business at all. You can learn, and it's amazing the number of people who say, I went to business school, or I did a marketing degree, but I didn't learn anything. I learned everything in the real world. And I'm a big believer in just going out there, getting stuck in and making mistakes, because the number one reason people never achieve anything is because they just don't get started or stick to it. And that goes as much for language learning as it does for business and anything else, for that matter. So I think, there's no reason that you have to learn how to do something. Our education system is built on the idea that you learn how to do something in advance and then you go and apply it. But I prefer the approach of applying it and then learning it at the same time. And if you make mistakes, well, that's all part of the learning process. Better to make a mistake in the doing of the thing than in the thinking about the thing.
Mm-hmm. Seems a little bit like maybe you were. Is it Ricardo Semler? Is it Richard Semler? He's I think he is a company. Basically, he's famous for a few TED Talks. One of the TED Talks was he allows his employees to set their own salary. And another one, yeah, I know, it's kind of crazy. It's really interesting, actually, what he talks about. I can't really remember it now. But another one he talks about is his attitude to learning is, I think he has an engineering background. And he said, to build a motorbike, what do? You go the first day and say, no, you have to build a motorbike in 3 months. So people have to come together to form a team. They have to learn, all the flow dynamics, aerodynamics, you name it. So, they're not learning the theory first. They have to put it into practice and then, get the theory to back it up. So very, very similar to your way of thinking is you go in, you do it. Oh my God, I have a customer service issue. Maybe I'll research that. I'll ask somebody else or something. So that's it. It's
yeah. I would say that I'm also a very keen learner. So I do learn a hell of a lot. It's just that I don't tend to learn and then wait. I tend to learn and do at the same time. So yeah, it's not for everybody. A lot of people I know can experience anxiety in those kind of situations. I quite like being thrown in at the deep end, having to speak to someone in a foreign language, even though it's not what I teach actually, but I quite enjoy it personally. But that can be very anxiety inducing for people, for different kinds of people. So it's definitely not for everybody, but that's just for better or for worse how I've done things.
Yeah, so it's not for everybody. I think most of us have felt a little bit of anxiety at one time, especially when we don't know the answer and we're maybe in a crowded place and people are listening.
For sure.
So your attitude, this is kind of bridges the gap between the language learning and the entrepreneurship. That your attitude is how would we say, your relationship with fear and anxiety, because for some people, they can be anxious, public speaking, launching a business. So can you give some advice on, fear, anxiety?
Yeah, I actually do experience a lot of fear and anxiety. It's just with different things. So some things, I think there are certain things in my life that I'm very kind of gung ho about, and other things I'm very conservative about. So, for example, with personal finance, I'm extremely conservative, and I can experience anxiety around money issues of different kinds, because I think that's just something which I am quite attuned to for whatever reason. So in terms of personal finance, for example, I'm quite conservative and can worry a lot about that. But when it comes to business finance, I'm extremely pro risk and quite aggressive in that sense. I'm very quick to invest in things that I see opportunity in. So I think that there's a lot of misconceptions around starting a business. The kind of folklore of starting a business is that, hey, it's this big risky thing which could crash and burn and destroy your life savings, put you into debt, and make you bankrupt if it goes wrong. But that only holds true if you need to borrow $1 million to start a business, for example. Whereas with the internet, you can start a business with nothing and take this approach to building a business, which is a bit like climbing a mountain. You put your foot on the first rock, and then the second, then the third, and then you just kind of go up from there. And in that sense, it's a bit like language learning. So I've built my company the way that I learn languages, which is just I began my business one day in a coffee shop in Doha, which is the capital of Qatar, where I used to live, and I read about a guy who had a language blog, and I thought, hey, I can do that. So I went on the internet, started a free WordPress blog, wrote my first blog post, and that was the beginning. And then I wrote the second and the third and the fourth. And then eventually I learned to create books and build products and sell them. Everything was one step at a time. So I've never felt any risk particularly. And so there's been no particular fear. The kind of fear that I have more than anything as the business has grown has been more along the lines of, well, what happens if this all crumbles down to the ground? Because then there's a lot to lose. So I think I probably have more fear around loss than I do around the prospect of gain, which is a pretty established psychological phenomenon as well. Loss aversion is more powerful than the prospect of gaining something. So I think for people who do experience fear or anxiety around something like starting a business, the first thing to think about is, well, is this justified? Because, would you still have that fear if I told you could get started today for free? And then the only thing you have to lose is your time and your hard work. So everything really depends on the frame that you give it and the lens that you look through.
Okay. Excellent answer. And you anticipated where I was going next with, we want to kind of go back to, you'd finished working in the hostel, and then we'll kind of fast forward a little bit to Doha. So
yes,
where did the idea for your business come about, and how did it start?
Yeah, so it was very simple. So I spent a few years teaching English, and that kind of led me to Japan, and then to Qatar, and then later to Egypt. But I went the usual teaching route. So I did my Delta, and I went on to do a master's in teaching, and eventually I moved into management. And at that point, I felt a real lack of creativity, because I'm a very creative person, and I missed that in among the kind of desk duties of a middle manager. I didn't enjoy it, and so I was always looking for a creative outlet, and languages had always been my passion. And so it was just one random day when I was reading a book called The $100 Startup by Chris Guillebeau. And he mentioned a guy called Benny who had a blog, and he was traveling the world, paying his way through his blog. And so I looked at his blog called Fluent in 3 Months. I had a look at it, and I thought, well, I can do that. And I just did. And it was as simple as that. It would happen one day. I was sitting in a cafe on a Saturday afternoon and just started the blog. And I think because I could see that the idea had legs and it was possible to earn a living doing that, even though I didn't understand the ins and outs of it yet, I knew that it was possible because there was proof of someone who was doing it. Because I could fixate on that outcome granted, I didn't know how to get there, but that was okay because I could then all I had to do was figure out how to bridge the gap between where I was then to where I wanted to get to, which I eventually managed to do.
Okay, so you mentioned Benny Lewis. He's quite well-known internet
Yeah.
polyglot. And so you said he can do it, I can do it. How did you think you would position your offering differently to him?
Yeah, good question. Because the first thing we always get told on the online space is you have to have a unique angle, a USP.
Don't have a Me Too
no
company, isn't it? Not what they say.
You're right.
Yeah.
You don't want it to do what someone else is doing. And the truth is, it took me years to figure it out. And I actually really struggled to differentiate myself because I read all right from day one, I read all the advice about finding your unique thing, and I thought, well, what can I do that's different? I don't know. And so for years, I just made it all about me. I thought the only unique thing really that I can offer here is me and my experience, which is kind of why I called it I Will Teach You a Language, which I think is a terrible name, but it's the best I could do at the time.
Well, it says what it is.
It says what it is, but see, what I unwittingly did was create a personal brand, and I didn't know what a personal brand was at the time. But one of the ways to differentiate yourself online is with a personal brand, because every person is unique, and as learners, we resonate with our teachers. So what I was unwittingly doing was positioning myself as the teacher, as the kind of the thought leader, if you like. And although I didn't have a unique angle to my method, I had the uniqueness of Olly, which is enough to get started. Now, over time, I kind of outgrew that because it's great to have a personal brand, but then you have to be able to say what you do differently. So I can say, hi, I'm Olly. I teach languages. Yeah, that's not enough by itself. And so eventually I started to gravitate towards the idea of learning through story, which I realized I'd done all along. I just hadn't really understood it in that way. And so I started to mold this into a tangible concept, learning languages through story. And then so that kind of ended up becoming, hi, I'm Olly. I teach you how to learn languages quickly through story. And then that in itself, then story ended up becoming more important than Olly eventually. So now the business is all about learning through stories, and my books and my courses kind of stand on their own two legs. And yes, I'm a part of that, but a dwindling part. And that's good for me because it means I can take a bit of a back seat, because it's been quite some time now that I haven't been able to manage everything by myself. And we have a team of more than 10 people who run the business. And I'm not really a central part in that anymore.
Okay. And you mentioned the $100 startup. And of course, we talked a little bit about, you like learning from, where do you learn from? Books, from courses, mentors? Tell me a little bit about that.
A bit of everything is the answer. So you're asking specifically about business?
Business, yeah.
Yeah. So I learned a lot of my initial stuff from podcasts. So I would go to the gym and I'd listen to podcasts about starting your own online business. And I got a lot of my early education from that. And a lot of the kind of key messages were communicated very well in those podcasts. So things like the concept of content creation and the idea of generating traffic through content, and the importance of consistency in content, the importance of building an email list and communicating regularly with your audience. These are all kind of online business fundamentals. And those were really drilled into me early on by the podcasts that I was listening to. Books are of limited help here because the trouble is that information changes so quickly. If you take a year to write a book and then another year to publish it, it's out of date by that point. So books are of limited value when it comes to the actual execution of these things. So podcasts are great because they're kind of very dynamic. I also followed a lot of blogs and invested a lot of money in courses. So I would take courses about how to start a blog, and then later how to create your first product, and then how to automate it, and how to grow, and how to do marketing. And I've invested huge amounts of money in learning online business, and that's one of the key things that I think I've done. I've always kind of taken the approach of, look, if I want to learn this stuff, why am I trying to get it all for free? Why don't I just go to the people who teach this stuff, pay them, and learn what has to be learned? And that's worked out very well, because what I again, what I learned from that without knowing it, what I can articulate now that I didn't know at the time, but actually unknowingly did, was it's the idea of speed, because money is attracted to speed. This is a Dan Kennedy concept, which is extremely important. And a lot of people, the kind of default for a lot of people learning online business is to try to learn everything for free, take their time, don't spend any money, bootstrap it. But actually, it's far more valuable for you to pay a certain amount of money to learn from somebody and save yourself 6 months to 12 months of messing about, figuring it out for yourself. You learn the lessons that need to be learned right now, and that buys you time, and you pick up speed and momentum that way. And so then everything you learn kind of compounds. And so when I look at, colleagues of mine or contemporaries of mine who kind of started around the same time, one of the big reasons I think that differentiates people who have developed quickly in their businesses as compared to those who haven't, is that those who have been willing to invest in learning have progressed so much quicker than others. And so that's partly why I actually have a kind of sister business called Langpreneur, where I together with my colleague Jan, we help creators build online businesses around their expertise. And one of the reasons that I decided to do that was because I learned so much myself from investing in good quality teaching that I wanted to offer that back to people and offer the kind of stuff that I've been learning myself to others, so that they can make fast progress too.
Okay, so money well spent, leverage other people's expertise and learn as quickly as possible, outsource things that are maybe too technical, take too long to learn, and maybe don't like doing anyway. Something like that.
I mean, yeah, outsourcing is kind of a different thing. I did everything myself for a long time. I think a lot of people do at the beginning. The outsourcing for me was a much slower process. But I think the key, if I were to go back and do it all again, the thing that I would make sure to do is invest as much as possible in my own education from the start. And if I was getting started today, I'd do exactly the same thing because I mean, you can go slow and take your time for sure, but it takes a long time to build a business. I mean, my business is 7 or 8 years old now, and I know what I'm going to be spending the next 5-10 years on. I can see where that's going to go. It's a lifetime's work, really. And just like languages, the reason that most people won't succeed is just because they give up before they hit traction. So I think just like with languages, you want to get traction as soon as possible. And so in business terms, that means earning enough money to live from. That should be really the goal of any new business. Is how can you get to a kind of basic level of profitability, so that you can then free up your time by quitting your regular job and then devote all your energy into the business. Like that's the kind of one of the big milestones in starting a business. And by far the quickest, you can get there quite quickly, but you do need to have a roadmap to follow. And if you try and figure it out yourself, you'll waste huge amounts of time on the wrong things.
Okay. And what did you waste a lot of time on that you wish you hadn't?
Yeah, well, I mean, because I did invest in my learning, I don't think I did waste a huge amount of time. But I think the thing that I did very well was the basics. And that is consistent content creation. Because what you get from consistent content creation is you build an audience. And once you have an audience, then you have your business, because you can create products and services for them. So the thing that I did very well, even though it took time, so for the first, I did nothing but blog for the first year. So for 1 year, I just wrote a blog post a week. And then after 1 year, I created my first product. And so but I didn't have a kind of functioning business. I wasn't in a position that I could quit my job until after a couple of years. And so I don't know if that's fast or slow. I think it's probably quite common, a fairly standard pace for someone who's learning online business from scratch. And so I don't really think I wasted my time, because the big thing I did was start to build my audience, because that's what kind of created created the business. Because in online business, you've got two ways of going, right? You can start with a product or you can start with an audience. And if you start with a product, you have your business up and running much faster because you've got something to sell, but you're in the difficult position of not having anyone to sell it to. So then you've got to go and find people to buy your thing. The other way of starting with the audience first, which is what I did and what I always recommend people to do because it's just an easier way to start, is that you build your audience and then you can get to know them by having an email list, communicating with them, asking questions, surveying them, interacting with them in the comments, things like that. You get to know what their pain points are, and then that can become the business that you generate. You get to know who your audience is, what they need, and then your business is then helping them do that thing. So the one thing that you can do to accelerate that process is to make sure that you're focused in terms of topic. So in my case, that was actually a disadvantage because I was just a kind of general language learning guy. Hey, I'll help you learn a new language. So people on my list were learning Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, French, Swahili. So it was quite difficult for me to service all of those different areas. So what I would advise someone getting started is to be very focused. So don't just talk about language learning, talk about learning Spanish, for example, or learning Japanese, because then the entire audience that you build is going to be learning that one language, which is going to then lead to a very clear and defined product line that you can create off the back of that. You just have to help them learn Japanese. And then you can expand later from that if you want to. So the thing that took me longer, the thing that slowed me down in the beginning was not being focused in terms of a single language. And the reason I did that was because I wanted to blog about my passion, which was language learning. I didn't want to be a Spanish teacher or a Japanese teacher. I wanted to just blog about language learning. So that did make things slower for me, but it ultimately, I think, ended up being an advantage because now that we have such a large audience learning different languages, we can create all these different courses for them. And so that's what actually gives the business its scale. But it was a difficult way of going about it.
So you started off, and you think that you may be too general, as you say. You're trying to cater to too many different audiences. So you brought up something really interesting there, which I'd like to explore a little bit more about choosing an audience, because that's the one thing is, cutting off all these other options, and the other is sometimes audiences are not profitable. I mean, it's not the right audience, not the right time. How do you know what's a good way to check that?
So there's a kind of it depends on whether you are to coming at this from a very general business perspective. It depends on the market, right? So if there's one answer to this is, in any market, how do you check the profitability of any market, or the viability of any market? From like lawn care treatments to hair products or whatever. But would it be fair to say that your audience is in the language learning space?
My audience, I think, would be mostly English language teachers and directors of study, university teachers, that sort of.
Yeah. So in that sense, then your market is the ESL market, right? Or the EFL market. And, it's fairly evident that is an established market with plenty of earning potential. So, I mean, that's enough. If you're in the EFL market, then that's a viable market. There's no question. What the challenge then is, well, in the sea of competition, how do you stand out? So once and the same goes for me in the general language. I mean, I teach Spanish, I teach Japanese, I teach French, I teach Chinese. These are all clearly proven markets. So the more important challenge is, how do you stand out within that market? Now, if you came to me and said, like, Olly, is there a market for rose scented candles? I have no idea. That would be a different question. Then we'd have to do basic market research, which you can do by looking at the performance of different product lines on Amazon, for example, seeing what people are actually spending money on. But in the language market, people do spend money. It's a huge market. It's I don't know how many billions of dollars it is, but it's huge. So there's no question that the market's there. The challenge is standing out.
Okay, so there's a couple of things there. So the first one was doing your market research. So for somebody looking to start out or are in business at the moment, you mentioned Amazon.
Yeah.
is one place. What's the demand for a particular product on Amazon? Is there any other cheap or free way of doing market research?
I mean, so the reason that Amazon often comes up in questions of market research is because it's the world's biggest marketplace and people go to Amazon just to buy things. They don't go to look around or to read articles. They go to buy stuff, right? So let's say we're thinking about starting a business for rose-scented candles. If you go to Amazon and you see that there are 100 different varieties of rose-scented candles and they have thousands of reviews, what you know from that is that large numbers of people are buying rose-scented candles, and that is enough to validate that the market. You know it's big enough. If, on the other hand, you went there and there were like maybe 2 or 3 different rose-scented candles there and a couple of reviews on each and just not much activity, that's not a good sign, because it means in the world's biggest marketplace, no one is selling rose-scented candles. So that is a very good first port of call. And if you're kind of getting into very, because some of the biggest products out there are very niche things, like dog kennels or jet ski safety devices. I don't know. There's like so many different products out there, and so it's not always obvious unless you have specific market knowledge whether something is a business or not. So yeah, I mean, after that, what you would want to do is just to do a lot of basic searching on different marketplaces. So like, Google Shopping, maybe look on things like Alibaba potentially. Are people selling these things on eBay or Craigslist or whatever? You want to look around in the places where people are buying and selling things and seeing whether that thing that you plan to sell there's a lot of activity there.
And forums as well, what people are talking, what they're saying about products and what they're unhappy with and what the problems are. Would that be a good place?
Yeah, I mean, again, what that would show you is that there are people who are buying it, and the fact that they're talking about it shows that they're buying it. But that's probably a different level of research. So the first step would be to say, right, is this actually a market? Can I start a business making rose-scented candles? Assuming the answer is yes, then the next question is, right, but how do I stand out from the crowd? That's when you might want to go to forums and say, and look at what do people like and dislike about rose-scented candles. And then you can see, okay, well, actually, I've looked at all these reviews in these forums, and it turns out that the thing that everybody hates about their rose-scented candles is that they burn too quickly. So what I'm going to do is make a rose-scented candle that burns super slow and lasts forever. And then that could lead you potentially to a niche, which could be the rose-scented candle that lasts forever. And then based on market research, you've come up with an idea for something which can differentiate you from everyone else.
And one thing that angel investors and venture capitalists, they hear all the time is the person goes and said, oh, there's 10 million rose-scented candles sold every year. If we get 1% of that market, we'll be happy.
Yeah, that works in big markets where you can actually do that kind of market analysis, right? So if you're thinking about starting a new type of car, or you want to get into the insurance industry, for these industries you have readily available data, and so what you would, and this is not my area of expertise at all, but my understanding is what you would do is you say, right, here is a $10 billion market, and if we can get where we aim to get 5% of that market. And the reason we think we can do that is because you have to know how you're going to do that, right? And that's where the differentiation comes in. So for example, Tesla might have looked at the car market and say, you know what, I think we can make a battery powered car and take 5% of the car market, of the automotive industry. And the reason we can do that is because we can make an electric car faster than everybody else. And that's the differentiator. All right. I think that's only going to be worth doing in very large industries. For most people, what you're going to be looking at is, what most people's aim is to start a healthy, profitable home business, which gives you an appealing lifestyle, passive income, and it can be genuinely life-changing without having to take in millions of dollars of investment to corner the car market. So in that sense, that kind of market research is probably not practical, because you don't need to to claim X% of any market in order to make a very good living for yourself. So yeah.
Okay, you brought up something interesting there. You said about positioning. Now, when people hear positioning, they think maybe brand differentiation, maybe price, but you talk about positioning being your product solving a problem that another product is not solving, or your service. Yeah, that's how you would see it.
That's how I tend to look at it. Just because, so your most powerful. Your biggest growth will always come from will always be led by the product. So if you've got a quality product, word gets round. People will talk about it in Reddit. They will post reviews on Amazon. They will recommend it to their friends. So I always think that if you can create a product that people like more than all the others, that's your best ever referral marketing mechanism. So you need to start with that, because think of how it would be if that were not the case, right? So if you didn't have anything that's unique, if your rose scented candle did nothing different from the other 100 rose scented candles on Amazon, then that means that the only game you can play is to outmarket your competitors, right? Because there's nothing special about your product, so no one's going to talk about it, no one's going to recommend it to their friends, which means you're then fully responsible for marketing it more than anybody else. But you can do that job for them and make it easy for them by having a product that everybody likes more than everything else.
Okay. And just to recap, we're talking to Olly Richards from teachmealanguage.com. Is that right?
I will teach you a language.
I will teach you a language.
Yeah.
There you go.
But most likely storylearning.com by the time people listen to this.
Storylearning.com.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to go back about a few points you made there and before, talking to Paul Salloway a few weeks ago. And Paul went in a lot about landing pages and marketing. So what you say is right. It's really good advice. Get a mailing list first.
Yes.
Yeah, get a mailing list. Somebody, I think I listened to these podcasts like you, and one guy was asked, what's your biggest regret? And he said, just get a mailing list. He said he had a business for 5 years, and he had no mailing list. Yeah. So yeah, that's the main thing. And
I mean, build a mailing list would be more appropriate because a mailing list is built one person at a time. So it's not something that you acquire. I mean, you can acquire a mailing, you can buy a mailing list from people, but I wouldn't advise it. Mailing list is built, and what a mailing list is what the mailing list gives you is the ability to contact people on demand. Because if you don't have a mailing list, then you actually have no way of contacting your customers other than doing things like updates on social media that most people won't see, and they're not paying attention anyway when they're on Instagram. So yeah, the mailing list is a really, really big thing. And it's built gradually over time.
Okay, and it's all part of the process of building the trust and the likability and building excellent products.
Exactly.
Yeah, that people have. So the second thing was quality. This is from a number of entrepreneurs we've spoken to over the past few weeks. Is that And maybe I'll put this into a kind of Cliff Notes version, or put it in a post or some kind of key nugget takeaways from people. Another thing people are talking about is just have a great product. So tell me about your great product. How do you make it great?
Yeah, well, assuming it is great. I mean, it might not be, but people seem to like it. So we have a lot of different products. Probably our most well-known products at this point are our books of short stories, which are, and that's been helped. So I publish my books with Teach Yourself, which is a well-known language publisher, and what they've brought to the table is they've helped us to get into bookshops around the world. So we've sold hundreds of thousands of these books, and that's done wonders for kind of getting the idea of learning through story out there, and it's really helped to grow the business. And most people are, although we have a big digital product business, it's the books which actually people share most on Instagram and give to their friends and buy as Christmas presents and things like that. So I know I've been self-publishing books for years, but one of the, since you asked about quality, working with Teach Yourself has been a fantastic experience because they've been able to kind of bring in the whole apparatus of a major international publisher to the equation. And so what that's done is it's layered on top many different things. So we've got multiple layers of editors, everything from copy editors to developmental editors to commissioning editors, and then, world-class designers and typesetters and things like that, along with multiple rounds of proofreading, although you can never do enough proofreading. When we released our first round of 6 books a few years ago, I got my first proof copy of the German book, Short Stories in German for Beginners, and I opened up the front cover and it said, Short Stories in German for Beginners. Read at your level and learn Italian the fun way, which was a wonderful, wonderful thing to see. So even the pros can never do enough proofreading. But what that's done is it's created a really quality product that people really like, and that would have been difficult to do ourselves just for the cost involved in having that number of professionals working on it, and not to mention getting it into bookshops as well. So the reason I mention this is because here is a product that people really like, and it's transformational for them. So I often get messages from people saying, I've just read your French book, and this has been an incredible experience because I've just realized I can read in French and I can enjoy it and I can understand it and I feel amazing. And so that kind of transformational experience then is a major breakthrough moment for people. And so because of that, guess what do they do next? Well, they look on the back cover and they see my website, and they come to the website and they think, oh, this is interesting. Cool. I can continue learning through story with different courses at different levels. And so what do? They then try out one of the courses, and then they give the gift the book to a friend who's just started learning French, who then goes through the same process. And if the product were not good, then that would never have happened. They would have picked up the book, flicked through it. It would be gathering dust on a shelf. Now, I'm sure that some books are gathering dust on shelves in some places, but it's the quality which starts the relationship, and that makes it so powerful. And obviously, I try to do that across all of my products. We have similar reactions to our courses as well, but the short story books are really the most kind of visceral example for me because they're the most widely disseminated products and the things which tend to spark the most emotion and joy in people.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about starting out with the books and finding a publisher and deciding to go with you've already outlined some of those reasons. They have that infrastructure, you can get into bookshops, and you had done quite a bit of self-publishing. So tell me about the transition from self-publishing to working with another publisher. What did you learn there working with?
Yeah, so I had probably 7 or 8 self-published books by that point, and then Teach Yourself actually approached me because they'd seen that the books were doing well, that they really resonated with people, and so Teach Yourself approached me and said, would you consider partnering up with us? And that was the start of a long conversation. And there are pros and cons to that. For most people starting out, I probably wouldn't recommend going the traditional published route because it's a lot slower. You make a lot less money in royalties, and it's extremely difficult. Everybody, for a lot of aspiring authors, a publishing contract is their dream. But it's extraordinarily hard to do. And because if you like, I could explain to you the process that a book goes through from conception to final approval from the board of a publishing company. It's really hard. And at every opportunity, it can just get shut down and discarded. So for most people, going the self-published route is by far the best way of doing it. But in my case, one of the things that Teach Yourself brought to the table was the commitment to produce these books in lots of other languages. So whereas I think we had 5 or 6 languages at that point, now we've got 25, 30 languages and at different levels as well. And that means I can just reach more people. And so people who buy our books in Swedish or Icelandic or Turkish, there's not much material in those languages in the first place. And so for them, it's a really important production because for these less common languages, there just isn't that much material out there. So that was the main reason that I decided to partner with Teach Yourself, because even though I actually gave up quite a lot of money in earnings from the self-published operation, I always try to focus on long-term growth and long-term potential above other things, and that's luckily worked out really well.
Okay, so I suppose we kind of got a bit of ahead of ourselves. So I'd like to go more into the development of your company and the products that you developed and where you are now. So let's go right back to Doha. You started the company. You were saying you were working for 2 years, and then you got a bit of traction. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so like I said, I just did nothing but blogging for the first couple of years, and it was a very, some people. So they say this kind of hockey stick growth where everything just explodes. I never had that. For me, it was long, slow grunt work, consistently publishing every week. And, but after a couple of years of doing that, that really adds up and starts to compound. And then more people start talking about you. And so you create opportunities for serendipity and things like that. And so it really was a case of sort of having faith in the process and sticking at the consistent content creation for long enough for the traction to build, and then eventually it does build. And then I don't really remember numbers at this point, but I think I probably launched my first product once I had something like 20 or 30,000 hits a month to my website, which is small, but it's something. And I had a mailing list of about 2,000 people. And so that was more than enough for me to launch my first product. And I didn't, I made a couple of $1,000s from it. It wasn't exactly life-changing, but it was what a lot of people refer to as your first money event. So the first time you actually sell anything online is a big moment, because it gives you confidence and the faith that you can keep doing it. So yeah, that's how it happened. And then everything else from there has just been the same thing. It's been steady, slow, consistent growth. But with business, I think a lot of the time, if you can just keep going, then everyone else just drops away over time, and then you end up in a stronger position the longer you can keep it up.
So you started, you stayed going, just consistently get in front of the PC, put your articles out every week, every month, whatever you were doing, and eventually you were building traction. You got people coming to the site. You built your first product. How did you scale from there?
It was literally more of the same. So more content, more like same consistency, more consistency, in fact, and then just grew and grew and grew over time. So I think one of the key things that did start to help facilitate that growth would have been actually starting to outsource content creation. So at the beginning, I would write all the articles myself. But then eventually I hired writers and content editors for the site who helped to then which removed me from the process of actually writing content. So now, at the moment we publish 3 or 4 very high quality professional articles a week on the website, and that starts to systematize the process of content creation. And when you're growing a business, it's your systems which do it for you. And so you've got to move gradually towards having a system for everything. And content creation, because it's very labor intensive, is one of those things which can really crush you if you insist on making all the content yourself. So I know for EFL Magazine, you have writers who contribute to your website, and that's a fantastic way of doing it, because then the business can continue to grow independently of you. Because any young business faces the faces the dilemma eventually of the owner becoming the bottleneck in the business, where they are the only people who can make and produce stuff. And so this is one of the key moments, is removing yourself as the bottleneck. So I managed to do that eventually by finding high quality writers and content editors. And that really that allowed us to put out more content and then keep it consistent over time. So it didn't give us that hockey stick growth at all, but it helped to just keep the foot on the gas.
It reminds me actually of an interview, which please go back if you haven't listened already, to Dean Rogers here in Tokyo, who what he said was that very similar is, don't make the business about you. And this is Joe's business and Joe runs everything here. And if, for example, you're trying to sell the business, that, like, for example, Dean was talking about, because he does a lot of takeover purchases and works with a lot of companies. If you go to Dean and you say, oh my God, I'm the linchpin of this business, and then I'm taken out, there's no business. So
yeah, this depends on what you're aiming for, right? So there are different. So if you are a business, if you are into acquisitions or flipping businesses, then this is absolutely fundamental, because you can't, you need to have an exit strategy. But that's not most people. I mean, if you are somebody who wants to build a cash flow business, so something that gives you, and improves your lifestyle, then you're probably not looking for an exit. I mean, I've never built my business with an exit in mind, because, I mean, why would I? I'm lucky enough to do fairly well. And why would I ever want to, give this up? And so I've, even for something at the scale of what we're doing, there's no need to sell the business. What's more pressing and more likely to be a problem for you is the systems and operational bottleneck. So it's like, you want to produce more content, and YouTubers have a very hard time with this, because YouTubers are the face and they have to be there on camera talking. I'm the face of my business, but anybody can write the words that go on the blog. YouTubers have a particularly difficult time, because and podcasters as well, for that matter, because you if you're not there in person, then it can be tricky. And so then you're faced with either, you've got a choice, right? You can either bring in other people to produce content so you can focus on the business, or you can remain the focus on the content and then bring in other people to manage the business. You got to go down one of those two routes. And what I did for a long time, and I think this is probably pretty common, is I was doing a bit of both, right? So I was trying to ramp up the content myself whilst also trying to grow the business, and that had to change. And in my case, I kind of ended up bringing on other people to create content so I could focus on the business. But actually, funnily enough, now I'm at a point where the business has grown so much that other people manage the business, and I actually go back to focusing on content, because that's what I enjoy. So I'm growing a YouTube channel at the moment, which you can find just search for Olly Richards on YouTube. And I'm putting all of my.
I had a look today, by the way. Yeah, your apps that work. I had a quick look at.
Right. Yeah.
There's 4 types of apps you were talking about on.
Yeah. So at the moment, I'm just, where are you? Kind of February 2021 as we speak, and I'm just experimenting like hell with different types of YouTube videos. But that's because I actually see that, now that I have good people operating the business, that the biggest value that I can add actually is by creating compelling content. And YouTube in particular, I think, is a huge growth opportunity for the future. So that's why I've decided to spend more of my time doing that. So we kind of go in ebbs and flows, and there may be a time in the future where I decide to sell, and at that point, it will just be a case of going through that process of. The question you have to answer is, how can you continue to grow your traffic and your audience with other people? But that's usually solvable in one way or another. It just might need a transition process.
Okay. So for people starting out, maybe as entrepreneurs or they're in this space, where would you see an opportunity that you wouldn't chase yourself? You're too busy, too many other things going on.
Ooh,
maybe
that's an interesting question.
Somebody could look at.
Well, I mean, the thing about that question is it kind of implies that it's a zero-sum game, but it's absolutely not the case, because you go on YouTube, how many thousands of English teachers are there on YouTube? There's room for everybody. And the great thing about for most people, the answer is going to be in having a personal brand, because a personal brand gives you immediate standout to everybody else. So, you and I could both start our own English teaching YouTube channel today. and some people would prefer to learn from you. Other people would prefer to learn from me. So it's not a zero-sum game, and I don't believe in the idea of competition in language learning, because I think people, one thing we know about language learners is they learn from lots of different people. When was the last time you found someone with one solitary language book on their shelf? They have dozens. So
over here I have.
we all do. we all do. And so I wouldn't think about trying to find the one thing that nobody else is doing, because then you're always going to be kind of looking over your shoulder thinking, well, what is someone copy? Because someone can always come and copy you, right? The one thing that nobody can ever copy is you. So I think for most people who are just looking to create a lifestyle business, then the biggest thing you can do is to create something with your personal brand.
Okay. And excellent advice there about branding and personal branding. What's for the future for Olly and I Will Teach You a Language? Did I get it right this time?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So there's a lot. It would take me the rest of the day to explain everything, all the plans that we have. But so as I've mentioned a couple of times already, so I Will Teach You a Language becoming storylearning.com. And that's us kind of doubling down on the concept of learning through story. And so we've got a lot more courses coming out in different languages and different levels. But one of the things that I'm moving slowly towards is to actually start to teach other subjects through story as well. So I'm not sure what those will be yet. But the idea of learning through story is pretty much, it's a timeless idea. And so hopefully within the next couple of years, what you'll see is us taking the concept of story learning and teaching other subjects.
Okay, well. Excellent. Wow. I can't wait to see that. So what's a good way to follow you? You're on LinkedIn, Twitter,
I wouldn't recommend, as we were discussing earlier, I wouldn't necessarily recommend contacting me on LinkedIn, because it might be 6 months before I see the message. But so the kind of home for everything is iwillteachyoualanguage.com. You can find me on YouTube as well. I have a podcast called the I Will Teach You a Language podcast, and you can email me, Olly at iwillteachyoualanguage.com, or you can hit me up on Instagram at I Will Teach You a Language. I'm kind of everywhere. I don't really do Twitter. Twitter is kind of not really my thing.
Me neither. Yeah, I just mentioned this in a presentation I was giving last week. Is Twitter? I just don't want to go there, basically.
Yeah, I prefer doing things which are more evergreen, and things you tweet something out and it's gone off into the ether. So I prefer to focus my time on stuff that is evergreen, like this podcast, for example, or a YouTube video or blog content. But yeah, if you want to get in touch, email, Instagram, I'm pretty responsive. So if you, I'll, as long as I get the message, I'll usually reply to you.
Okay, great. And just to remind the listeners of your websites again and your books, the names.
Yeah, so iwillteachyoualanguage.com. And if you want to find my books, they're all on Amazon. So you can go to Amazon and search for Olly Richards. I have dozens of books in different languages. So you might like what you found there. And on YouTube, search for Olly Richards and the I Will Teach You a Language podcast, available, and find podcast players everywhere.
And that's Olly with a Y.
I see. Yes, it's O-L-L-Y. O-L-L-Y.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I know, because sometimes people, I always say Philip with one L. Yeah. Sometimes it happens. So when I worked in an office every day, I asked clients to email, say it's Philip with one L, and people were like, oh, it is Philip with one L.
Yeah, well, I half the time I actually get oil, dear oil, O-I-L. And I think that's probably autocorrect kicking in, but
I really think autocorrect has got worse over the past few weeks. It's got out of control, hasn't it? Yeah. What's happening with autocorrect? It's gone crazy today. But anyway, Olly, thank you very much for your time. And
thank you. It's been a great to chat.
It's been a real pleasure. I learned a lot, and we hope the audience has too. And
one last thing I should mention, actually, since you asked, for people listening who want to build a business, actually, the best place to go to find more about me would be to langpreneur.com, because at Langpreneur we actually teach people how to build language-based businesses. So silly of me to not mention that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, please. This is the place to do it. Olly, thanks again.
Thanks so much. Great to talk.
Thanks for listening to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast with Philip Pound. For more great advice and resources, check out eflmagazine.com. If you found this podcast helpful, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.